What's up, everybody? Today I'm going to be giving my analysis of the Architects and Engineers report on World Trade Center 7, which they had released on September 3rd. Here's my general breakdown of what it's saying. Now, first off, they go over the original Nist findings from the official investigation. That report cites fire as being the cause of said collapse. It was stated that the fire heated up the beams on the northeast corner of the 13th floor. Now, here are the structurals for the 13th floor, and they're talking about this corner up here. Now, you'll see your north arrow in the upper left-hand corner. That means that we're looking north, which is pretty much the default view. Like if there was no north arrow and I was ever in a pinch and forced to assume what direction these drawings were in, I would always assume north. This is the typical way blueprints are oriented. So if we zoom in on this corner here, this is when this says happens. That heat from said fire caused G3005, K3004, and D3004 to buckle from the heat, which then pushed girder A2001 6 1/4 inches to the west, which made it go off its seat, detach from column 79, causing that section to crash into the 12th floor, along with knocking column 79 out. So with this, Nist says that this caused an 8-story collapse, which then triggered the entire building to begin to follow suit. This is their computer-generated model of the collapse. Alright, so here's the problems with this official report. First, they assume the system to be rigid with no sway or give, which is not true of these buildings. Even when we're building them and putting them up, the crane is sometimes pulling these sections inches in each direction, depending on which way the counterweight is facing or how big of a load that they're lifting and whatnot. But these buildings are purposely designed to endure this. You have to think with a skyscraper, you're going to need movement and a bit of flexibility because once the windows are in, you're going to have wind loads bearing down on these. So it's in the design. Many skyscrapers even have what's called a mass damper at the very top to counteract this sway. Next, Nist never included these side connector beams S3007, G3007, and K3007 in their model. Now, it shows them at some points in their report, but is not added into their simulation, and in their simulation, they show G3005 buckling, which could not have happened with those beams in place. So that leaves K3004 and D3004 buckling, which also were inaccurately inputted because they had left out the beam stiffeners, which these are the beam stiffeners right here. The web's like this, and they're inserted to prevent exactly that. And in this section, it shows that A2001 had them halfway up, not included in the Nist model. And that's not to mention that there was a floor welded onto all of these beams, which was holding them together, preventing buckling as well. You can also see here that they use Q decking, which is a metal deck that is then filled with mesh and concrete as such to create a solid floor. Now, another thing that you can see on this section that's shown the Q decking is that it also shows fireproofing unless otherwise noted. That's a foam that they spray on to coat these beams once they're in to protect them from being affected if there's a fire on one of the floors. I mean, regular office fires do happen, which, let's be honest, how big was this fire in the first place? It burned all day, barely spread, and you could barely even see it. Now, let's compare that to the fire of the London Tower. Now, this is a fire that all the fireproofing in the world would not matter. This is where you could blame fire for displacing and buckling beams, but this is exactly why they coat these beams, so the structure stays unaffected until someone can put it out. Now, it's also of note that this building did not collapse. It burned completely out to its frame and never collapsed. But this building, where the fire is a fraction of the size, built in downtown Manhattan with the best construction and highest building standards in the world, collapses in under 9 hours. In fact, it's the only steel building to ever collapse from a fire in history. Now next, we have probably the most crucial piece of info left out by the Nist report being the column side plates. Now most of the columns on this building, as you can see, did not have side plates because they have I-beams connecting to them from all sides. But column 79, the column in question, does not. And as you can see in this section, had two 16-inch wide plates on either side, which created a 1-inch lip on either side of the 14-inch column, rendering it impossible for girder A2001 to move 6 1/4 inches to the east and off its seat because it would have hit the lip of the plate and get trapped there. Now, going through this old news footage of the construction of World Trade Center 7 from 1986, towards the end here, I was able to determine that these side plates were, in fact, installed. Now, if I stop it by the end here, by looking at the prints and using the old buildings to orientate myself, you can see the North Tower here, you can see World Trade Center 6, and Verizon here to the west. So I can determine that this is column 76, making this column 79. Now, the orientation of the Q decking also confirms it. Says you can see it's running east to west coming up to column 79, and then shifting north to south on the east side of column 79, exactly where the structurals show the orientation of the I-beam shifting. Now this picture is looking south, so that would make this girder A2001. And as you see here, column 79 very clearly has steel plates protruding 1 inch north, which would prevent A2001 from sliding off its seat, disconnecting it from column 79, and subsequently collapsing that corner of the floor. So now forgetting all that, take away the connector beams prohibiting G3005 from buckling and pushing A2001. Forget the beam stiffeners. Forget that there was a deck connected to it, further diminishing their chance of moving. Forget the fireproofing that coated these beams in the first place. Forget the steel plates that would have prevented it from moving more than 2 inches max, even if those other things were able to happen. Even if all that weren't there and the floor did collapse the way Nist claimed it did, this report also determined that it would have only generated about a third of the impact that floor was designed to absorb anyway, so it would have simply just fell into the 12th floor and been contained there and stopped. It would take 632,000 pounds of force to collapse the 12th floor, and it only calculates to 215,211 pounds of force. Furthermore, Q decking is just as powerful as a reinforced concrete slab, but it has a steel under it and a steel decking under it, so which makes it far lighter with less impact. It says that they used a 3,500 concrete mix for this building, which is average. Basically, how it works is the higher the number, the stronger the mix. For instance, most columns and walls in a reinforced concrete building would be 10,000 mix because they're vertical and you want them to be the strongest part of your building. Most floors, since they don't have metal decking underneath, will use anywhere from a 4,000 to a 6,000 on average, and slabs will be typically 6 to 8 inches. This slab was 5.5 inches at this part and 2 inches at this part. This makes for a much lighter slab and would be much less of an impact on the floors below. So basically, when inputting all the correct information, the initial 8-story collapse Nist claims that caused the entire collapse could never ever have happened. But in this report, they ran the simulation anyway. And when you do that, it shows that when the Nist model is run and those floors collapse the way they say they did, even though we know that could never happen, the building tips over, which is not what was observed in the video. So that's out. But then they just kept running it anyway, keep going up 8 stories. So what if these 8 stories collapse first? 13 to 21, it still tilts 7 3/16 inches. 21 to 29 tilts 5 3/8 inches. 29 to 31 tilts 3 3/4 inches. They had to run this model all the way up to floors 37 to 45 before the tilting was negligible and went down straight in the building, which could have never happened. The highest floor where the collapse could have initiated was floor 16, being that in that video we can observe floors 17 to 47 falling together as a unit. So across the board, the official report of what caused World Trade Center 7 to fail is completely inaccurate and an impossibility. So what caused the collapse? Several models and scenarios were then ran as a team observed and analyzed how the simulations reacted until they found what matched the videos of the collapse to a T. What they found was that the only way Building 7 could have collapsed the way it did was if every core column simultaneously failed over 8 stories, followed by all the exterior columns simultaneously failing 1.3 seconds later. We also know from the video, like I just said, that this had to occur below the 17th floor. So now that we have this information on how the collapse took place, let's look at how a controlled demolition works. First off, most of the dynamite is typically loaded on the lower levels, especially the first floor. That's where the greatest amount of drops happen. Okay, check. We know the collapse started on the lower floors. It continues below that during the implosion, dynamite is detonated at split-second intervals set to a series of pre-programmed delays. Now we know that the only simulation that works is if all the core columns simultaneously fail and then a second later all the outer columns fail, which would be indicative of a pre-programmed delay. Add that to this omission by building's owner Larry Silverstein that they gave the order to, quote, pull it and then watch the building collapse.
The smartest thing to do is pull it. And they made that decision to pull, and then we watched the building collapse.
Add that to this account.
And he says, well, you got to stay behind this line because they're thinking about bringing the building down. They didn't say what building. They just said bringing a building down. So we're like, okay, we'll take their word for it. We'll stay behind the line. And he went over and he talked to one of the, through all the commotion, he goes over and he asked one of the Red Cross, or one of the firefighters, what was going on. I guess, I don't know if he got an answer or not. He came back over with his hand over the radio, and it sounded like a countdown. And at the last few seconds, he took his hand off, and you heard 3, 2, 1, and he was just saying, just run for your life, just run for your life. And then it was like another 2, 3 seconds, you heard explosions. Like, boom! It's like a distinct sound. It's not like when compression, like boom, 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 like floors that were dropping and collapsing. This was boom, and like you felt a rumble in the ground, like almost like you wanted to grab onto something.
Guys, he can tell you I'm okay, all right? Here, hold on. You want to call your mother or something? You gotta get back to here.
Add that to the fact that no steel building has ever collapsed to fire damage in history. Add this to the British Broadcasting Channel accidentally recording its collapse before it happened.
You might have heard a few moments ago I was talking about the Salomon brothers building collapsing, and indeed it has. It seems that this was not a result of a new attack. It was because the building had been weakened during this morning's attacks. We'll probably find out more now about that from our correspondent Jane Stanley. Jane, what more can you tell us about the Salomon brothers building and its collapse?
Well, only really what you already know. Details are very, very sketchy. As you can see behind me, the Trade Center appears to be still burning.
Add that to Silverstein curiously having a doctor's appointment that morning when typically he spent every single morning at the World Trade Center.
That particular morning, because I have light-colored hair and fair skin, and I'm an annuity to the dermatologist, my wife, God bless her, had made an appointment for me at the doctor.
And now, with this report that first completely tears the official Nist breakdown to shreds and then concludes through much analysis that the only model where this building comes down the same in the video is global failure of all the core columns, followed by the global failure of the exterior columns, which I find to be nearly identical to a pre-planned building implosion, I think it's finally safe to say that World Trade Center 7 is truly the smoking gun of September 11th, 2001. Where we go one, we go all.
So I wrote a book in 1995, and I said that if the West doesn't wake up to the suicidal nature of militant Islam, the next thing you'll see is the militant Islam is bringing down the World Trade Center.
I gotta go back to America. I gotta go get ready for the bomb. We're gonna be not getting ready to bomb. We're gonna be not getting ready to bomb. Better watch out. Check out the one.
The information that the Central Intelligence Agency has obtained by questioning men like Khalek Sheikh Mohammed. He told us the operatives had been instructed to ensure that the explosives went off at a point that was high enough to prevent people trapped above from escape.
There were those two explosions. I was at the base of one of those buildings and it literally shook.
Somebody grabbed my shoulder and I started running, and the shit's hitting the ground behind me. And the whole time you hear boom, 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 boom. I think I know an explosion when I hear it. That didn't sound like just a building falling down to me while I was running away from it. There's a lot of eyewitness testimony down there hearing explosions.
All I can attest to is that by noon or 1 o'clock, they told us we had to move from that triage site up to Pace University, a little further away, because Building 7 was going to come down or being brought down.
We were watching the building actually because it was on fire. The bottom floors of the building were on fire, and we heard this sound that sounded like a clap of thunder. Turned around, we were shocked to see that the building was, it looked like there was a shock wave ripping through the building, and the windows all busted out, and it was horrifying. And then, about a second later, the bottom floor caves out, and the building followed after that.
Keep your eye on that building, it'll be coming down. Building is about to blow up. Moving back. All right, guys. We are looking back. There's a building about to blow up.
It's amazing.
Amazing, incredible, pick your word. For the third time today, it's reminiscent of those pictures we've all seen too much on television before, when a building was deliberately destroyed by well-placed dynamite to knock it down. And so therefore the smoke that we were talking about, and keep in mind, there are firemen, policemen, other workers down there working, searching for people in the previously collapsed World Trade Center 2 towers, fates unknown.